On this path from Smith to Arrow de Breu, something got lost. Economics became increasingly interested in optimal solution, so-called first best solution, and in Pareto improvements where someone gains without anyone else losing. Such cases are pleasant, but they are also rare. Most real economic policy decisions became a science of optimization. Politics remains the art of compromise. This is where Danny Roderick's work becomes important. Roderick has argued that there is no single set of best practice in current context, and the most elegant pension reform on paper is worth little if the people affected by it never accepted it. In real societies, there are rarely perfect solutions. Sustainable reforms therefore require compromises that people are willing to support. Not the theoretically optimal policy, but the one that can actually carry society forward. As Roderick puts it, we need a second best mindset, a second best institutions to match it. Need more second best. This leads to a sentence I consider central to the talk. Compromise is not the opposite of rationality. It's rationality under conditions of pluralism. So far, I have treated compromise as an individual phenomenon, something that happens between a baker, the customer, a buyer, and the seller. But what happens when an entire society becomes capable of compromise? This brings me to the second part of my argument, the wealth of compromises. If individuals benefit from compromise in markets, societies may also benefit from compromise in politics. This is a hypothesis my colleagues and I set out in a paper we have published last year. We examined 170 countries combining GDP per capita with a social cohesion index. So we use the fragile state index and some sub-indices of the fragile state index. So if you're interested in more, we can talk about that later. So this index measures the trust in institutions, the intensity of conflict between social groups, the legitimacy of the state, and respect for the rule of the law. Trust in institutions, intensity of conflicts between social groups, the legitimacy of the state, and respect for the rule of law. And the result is strikingly clear. The correlation between economic performance and social cohesion is around 0.68. I think a remarkably strong relationship. And the relationship is not linear. Below a certain threshold, it is weak, but beyond that threshold, prosperity and cohesion rise together, sharply. A modest improvement in the cohesion index from about 30 to 35 points on a scale that runs to 40 is statistically associated with a doubling of the GDP per capita. So the handling method is simple: prosperity and social cohesion move together. So I will show you now 4 countries, and I excuse for not using African countries, but I think I'm not from this region, and I think it would be more interesting to get my interpretation of the countries I know a little bit, not than having some ideas on the countries I do not know that built countries, African countries. But spoiler alarm, tomorrow in the PhD seminar, I will talk about the African countries, and I hope to get some inputs from the students about how we can interpret the differences within the African states. Okay, so a country I know a little bit is Germany, and perhaps we can say of Germany, this our empirical research shows that there is a conflict between narrative versus reality in Germany. So it's one of the most prominent we have at the moment in Germany in my interpretation. Germany is often described through a narrative of decline. The data tell a more different story. Since 2007, Germany's GDP per capita has grown by around 26% in nominal terms, while social cohesion has improved relative to other countries. So the social cohesion in Germany is rising. Germany has remained consistently among the 15 most cohesive society in the world, ranked 12th in 2023, the most recent year in our data. That does not mean Germany needs no reform. It means those reforms can build on a solid ground rather than on the rubble of a broken society. Let me have a look on the Nordic countries, the European Nordic countries. High trust, high prosperity. Norway, Finland, and as I said, we have the data until 2023. It remains among the world's leading economies. But social cohesion has eroded dramatically. Between 2007 and 2023, the United States fell from rank 23 to rank 70 in our cohesion index. Stephen Nowitzki and Inga Sieblatt have described this process in their widely read book on how democracies die. And democracies rarely collapse suddenly. They erode slowly as political opponents stop recognizing one another as legitimate, as compromise itself stops looking like an option. Strong formal institutions, like in the US, can mask this erosion for a while, functioning like an economic safety net. But the society is unlikely to remain economically stable indefinitely once its internal cohesion keeps unrevealed. So that's our suggestion. It's not true, not the truth, just a hypothesis. Only a hypothesis on China, the last country we'll talk about today. Rapid growth, weak cohesion. A glass ceiling. Between 2007 and 2023, China's GDP per capita grew by roughly 460% in nominal terms, an extraordinary achievement. And yet, China remains at best a middle-income country by international comparison. Still a middle-income country. Meanwhile, its position in our cohesion index has remained persistently low. 149 in 27, 135 in 23. Trust in institutions, political participation, and the rule of law remain limited. And these are precisely the factors that sustain growth over the long run. Weak social cohesion functions, in effect, like a glass ceiling on further growth. Our hypothesis, not the truth. But we should think about that if there will be still a growth in China like in the last years. And I think we have the first signs that it's not easy to handle China if you think about the demographic burden, about the low consumer performance, and so on and so on. Why does these patterns hold so consistently, so social cohesion and economic performance? Daron Acemoglu and James Robinson, the economists, offer one compelling answer: the distinction between extractive and inclusive institutions. Extractive institutions concentrate power and economic opportunity, include and create investment, and cooperation can flourish. Growth is possible for a time, even under extractive and authoritarian conditions. But lasting prosperity tends to emerge only where institutions enable participation, where conflicts are not suppressed, but institutional persist. To put it in a nutshell, free societies do not strive to cause their conflicts disappear. They strive because those conflicts are institutionally tamed. Compromises, in this sense, are rarely triumphant moments. They usually involve a quiet kind of political mooring. The acceptance that one did not get everything one wanted, but that quiet mooring is ultimately carried by the optimism of peaceful coexistence. Which brings me to what I consider another central sentence of this talk. Social cohesion is institutionalized compromise. The wealthiest societies in the world are not conflict-free. They have simply learned to resolve their conflicts productively. Conclusion: why it matters. Let me now bring these two arguments together, not with new material, but with a synthesis. Germany's own history, Germany's own economic history offers an instructive illustration. Alfred Müller-Armack, you can forget the name directly. Alfred Müller-Armack he coins the term social market economy. The social market economy is the economic concept of Germany, so it's termed social market economy. And Alfred Müller-Amack did not coin only the term social market economy, he coined also the term that the social market economy is an irenic formula. Irenic derived from the Greek word from irenics for peace, a peacemaking economic order. What he had in mind was that the reconciliation of competing interests as a foundation for economic, political, and moral reconstruction after the Second World War. That was his idea. He said, we can't eliminate conflicts in our society, but we have to try to get over them. We will not get over them, but we have to try every time as it would be possible to get over them. And that is the idea, again, of a compromise. So he said we have to reconcile different interests, different ideas, different perspectives. And as you know, this formula of the social market economy, this ironic formula, proved successful for decades, and the underlying idea travels well beyond Germany. I would generalize it into what I call an economy of reconciliation, built on three elements: opportunity, the real chance for people to shape their own economic lives; participation, a genuine stake in economic and political decision-making; belonging, the sense of being included in the society whose institution one is asked to trust. I'm convinced, without a stable middle ground, resting on these three elements, no society can remain resilient for long. Together, markets teach us how to compromise. Democratic institutions transform compromise into social cohesion. And social cohesion creates the trust that allows economies to innovate, invest, and grow. That is why you'll never grow alone. Thank you.
So I think we have 5 minutes left for a few questions, if there are any. Yes. Working yet? Seems good.
Thank you very much. Societies used to have a very strong social cohesion until conquest. So in that, create conflicts and use power to increase their own prosperity, then the theory doesn't hold, because even then, if you have a social cohesion and a very well-functioning society, it can still diminish your prosperity.
So I think that's a really important point. Our research is not an historically one, so it's a historical one. So our data goes back only to 2007, so a really short period of time. And our main interest was not to give an concrete explanation for every country. Our idea was to show that economic development and social cohesion are correlated to each other. So that, to say, for me, it's to argue against or with other economists to say, look, social cohesion is nothing nice to have, it's nothing to add on, but it's a hard economic factor. And in the moment, so we talk about it tomorrow in the PhD seminar, the problem, in a way, so it's only data, it's not an explanation, but the data shows that most countries in sub-Saharan Africa have a relatively low level of social cohesion. There are exceptions like Ghana and some Cape Verde and some others, but most of them have a low social cohesion. It might have historical reasons, so that's not our business, but it's a good hint to keep that in mind. Thank you.
Further questions?
I was wondering to what degree you take illegitimate compromises into consideration. An example. So in I think it was in 1997, Switzerland came under pressure. Switzerland, there was a huge outcry against that was an attack on Switzerland. So not only Switzerland, and I think this outcry had something to do probably a fairly high social cohesion index in Switzerland, right? And of course, Switzerland benefited dramatically from, and not just the Nazi goal, but in general the banking secrecy, right, where we stored away illegitimate money for decades and benefited from it. I think the social cohesion in a way protected this from imploding, right? And so in a way it led to illegitimate compromises that would factor into your model almost in a positive way. So have you taken that into consideration, or that's data?
Yeah, so not all the data, but it's easy to discuss what is really a good compromise. So Switzerland was a good compromise within Switzerland to have this, in a way, intransparency for the banking system. But for countries outside of Switzerland, they thought, hey, that's unfair what we're doing there. And the idea of a compromise is not to say you're wrong, you're right, but to splitting the difference. So the difference of different legitimate perspectives. That's the main point of a compromise. Both positions are legitimate, but they can't find together in agreeing to a content. So compromise is something totally different than a content. The content, we have the triumph of the one argument. In compromise, you say, okay, you're right, I'm right, but we have to find a solution to live in peace together. And I think that's a good example there to say, okay, there are good reasons why Switzerland act in that way, but why other countries want to have a different rules, and therefore we have to argue which could be a way to split, to find how we can split the difference between these positions. Yeah, thank you.
You that go to compromise. So I really appreciate you. But just being an economic student, I am from India. I just want to know how have you measured this economic development, economic performance, and social growth?
So, as I said, with the economic performance, we did a very similar job. We only use the GDP per capita. So there's a good reason why GDP will not. It's easy because we have to have a measurement which put not in other things into this index, because otherwise you get some difficulties with your correlation. And the GDP is a clear monetary oriented measurement. So you can disagree, but I know that there are other concepts for measurement wealth. So you're totally right. That's for empirical clearness. And as I mentioned, and we can talk about that later on, we use for social cohesion the so-called fragile state index from the Peace Fund. And so they measuring when it becomes more likely that a nation becomes fragile and a state becomes fragile. We turn it around and we picked out of this fragile state index 4 sub-indices, which has nothing to do with economic performance, but is measuring something like rule of law, the impression if the state is a legitimate state, if there are conflicts between groups. And like GDP, you can discuss a lot if it's really working and if it's really social cohesion. We use, so you was one part of the authors, we use different indices to test it, and even with other indices, we show a similar correlation. So do not depend on the index we use, or the index we use.
But when he is happy, but at least we need to be kind of embodiment an idea, and I wanted to kind of what was not from the perspective, let's say colonial perspective, but then drawing situation. It seems some time.
But it may not in the States, but